What's the best advice that you can give to a student that's looking to start a business at school?
Do it. I would say that the biggest thing is just doing it.
What are the plans for dynamic devices in the future, and do you believe that you'll set up any more businesses?
The honest answers here are that you fail a lot of times. There's a new business which we've just incorporated and are in the process of ringing up called Active Edge Solutions Limited, Active ESL.
If you were a secondary school student again now, what type of businesses would you look to start?
Well, I can only give you quite a biased answer, and that answer is only really helpful to somebody a bit like me who is interested in the techie stuff.
Hello and welcome to another Kids Interview Entrepreneurs podcast episode. My name is Richard Layton. I work as the Entrepreneur in Residence within the Brett Centre for Entrepreneurship, part of the University of Liverpool Management School. We're here this morning in UTC, the studio in the Baltic Triangle with our Year 9s, the competition class, which is an extra curricular session that as pupils participate in different sessions. Thanks as always to Mr. Carey, the Sector Skills Champion within the school, for his support not only of the Kids Interview Entrepreneurs podcast, but also the Enterprise Education in Secondary Schools programme as well. Thanks as always to Jay for producing and directing the podcast as well, a University of Liverpool graduate now. Our entrepreneur this morning, it's Alex Lennon, the founder of Dynamic Devices. And our two pupils who are going to be asking the questions are Lorelei and Raina. And I'll now hand it over to you both to ask our entrepreneur the questions.
What does Dynamic Devices do, and how long have you run the business?
Hi there, good morning. Well, thanks for having me here first. And so Dynamic Devices, essentially I founded Dynamic Devices, I think it was my second or third company back in the early 2000s, about 2004. I was based down in Cambridge at the time, although originally I'm from up here in the northwest in Liverpool. And when I came back to Liverpool with my family, we moved Dynamic Devices back here. We've been based out of Liverpool ever since. So what's that? That's about 20 odd years we've been going now, quite a long time. And we work in tech. So in essence, we make computers. We make computer devices for all sorts of different purposes. And the industry is called embedded systems, or the Internet of Things, IoT, or connected devices. What does that mean? You know, normally when I talk to people about that, I get a kind of a blank expression on their faces. And the way I try and explain it nowadays is that if you think about all of the computers, the desktop systems, the laptops, if you think about all of that, and then you think about all the cloud systems, web servers and all that stuff that's computing in the cloud around the internet, pick all of that up, throw it all away, and what you're left with, that's what we do. And you might think, well, what does that leave? There's not much left really, is there? But actually when you think about it, you know, you've got the washing machine in your house, that's got electronics in it, the microwave, alarm systems. You go to a point of sale system in a shop, and the retail systems. You get into medical devices, your mobile phone. The list goes on. So there's actually a huge, huge number and variety of different kinds of little devices doing all sorts of different jobs around you that you never really notice. And that's what we do. We make those. We integrate software onto the devices, and then we sell them into the marketplace. So we have customers who take those from us and go and sell them. So that's us.
Why did you decide to start Dynamic Devices as opposed to another type of business?
So I was in employment. I worked down in Cambridge for 10, 11, 12 years and learnt an awful lot. And I got to feel that I wanted to kind of go and do my own thing, really. I had some ideas about how I'd like to do things, how I'd like to run a business, the kind of work I'd like to do. And after a lot of soul searching, it was a really difficult decision, I decided to make the jump, make the leap, and found dynamic devices and start off on this journey of, what is this entrepreneurship? What is innovation? What value can we deliver that people might pay us money for? And I can tell you that as I look back on those days now, I was very naive. There was an enormous amount of stuff that I didn't understand and have had to learn, and I've quite enjoyed that. There are ups and downs, there are pros and cons to everything, but I think that I've learned very much more and had a much better time having made that decision at the turn of the century than if I'd carried on in permanent employment as I was.
What were you like in secondary school, and were you an entrepreneurial student?
Gosh, I don't know if I can remember. It's so long ago. That's a very long time. So I'm 51 now, and for me, I believe that things were really quite different back in. So when was I was in school? I was in secondary school, late 80s, last century, and it might be hard to really get your heads around in the world that you live in today. But we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have apps on phones. We didn't have Google. We didn't really. There wasn't a society in which people were using technology very much. We didn't have broadband. We didn't have fiber. We didn't have YouTube. None of it. So I was always very much a geek, and still am. I loved playing with computers. I got my first ZX Spectrum back in, I don't know, I was like early teens, and I was tapping away, and essentially I began to learn how to program computers by tapping on a computer day and night. And because we didn't have the internet, I got magazines from the local newsagent, and I was typing in the computer code in those magazines, and they were always, they had typos and bugs in, and I was learning how to debug computers. And that was my introduction to computing and to technology. And at that time, that was a really weird thing to do. That was really odd. So people would think, who is the weird guy who likes computers? Because it wasn't a thing. And that's changed an enormous amount. I think that with particularly probably consoles coming along, you got consoles, you got FIFA, everybody's playing games. It normalized this idea that everybody's on the computer. I mean, I was talking to my kids the other day, and they were saying it's actually quite odd if you're not doing online gaming and you're not online with your peers, which is completely the opposite of how I was in school. So I used to do a lot of computers. I was reasonably academic. I liked maths, I liked physics, and that was sort of the beginning of me moving into a career in technology, which is where I began. And no, not really. I would say I probably wasn't entrepreneurial at all. It was just not part of the conversation that we had in school in those days. You'd talk to the careers advisor, the understanding was you did your GCSEs, you did your A-levels, you went to university, you got a job somewhere. And a generation before me, you probably could expect to have that job for life. You had long-term employment, you'd work your way through a business. For my generation, that was changing a lot, and I think it's changed very much more now. And we're in a different world where you're constantly learning, you're moving careers, moving roles, and I've adapted to that, but it certainly wasn't what I set out to do. I was in permanent employment for about 10 years plus. I sort of fell into that job out of university, and moving to a level of independence and sort of running my own show, as it were, was a really big decision for me. It was really scary. So,
What were your favourite subjects, and what did you best like about school?
I've always loved maths. I'm, as I say, a bit of a geek. Always used to greatly enjoy fiddling around with bits of maths and learning about fractals and chaos theory and string theory, and how maths interacts with physics, and how maths and physics kind of underline an understanding of what our reality is all about. And I'm still really interested in that. So I studied, I was kind of a science-based set of A-levels, so I did maths, further maths, physics, chemistry, and back in the day we did something called general studies, which I think has gone away nowadays. And interestingly, I didn't get on with chemistry. You know, I couldn't really get on with chemistry. And one of the big decisions at that time was I dropped chemistry during my A-levels because there was a view that if I did 3 A-levels and did better instead of 4 A-levels and did worse, that would be better for the UCAS form and going to university. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know what it's like nowadays, but that's what I did. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I did. Did I enjoy school? The honest answer is no, not really. As I say, I have never been terribly sporty. I didn't really go out and play football with the lads. I really enjoyed playing Chucky Egg on the BBCB in the computer room in school, and that was quite an odd thing back then. So I wasn't really a good fit. So I tended to keep my head down and get on and do a bit of work. And it was only really when I kind of came to the end of my A-levels and I went to university that I came out of myself a little bit more. So there you go.
What could school have done to encourage or support you and others into entrepreneurship?
Well, again, you know, there's something of a theme, isn't there? And I think that things were different then. I think even in society, at least what I was exposed to, I went to Sacred Heart Comp up the road in Crosby. You know, great people, good school, but there was no real conversation about entrepreneurship and working for yourself and understanding the economy and how you might contribute to the local economy and employ people and all these other things. That was just completely absent. I think that in a wider context, the difficulty I had, which I think may still be true to a certain extent, that's why events like this are great, is that at any age, and even me now, you know, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what's ahead of you. You don't know what the future will bring. I'd be surprised and very impressed if anybody here has a really clear idea of what they're going to be doing in 10 years and what a particular job looks like and what the requirements of that job are and even whether you'd like doing it. And that's partly why I think we need to expose ourselves to lots of information around and about in the world to try to educate ourselves on whether what we think and what we assume is actually correct. And that's why I think things like work experience and internships and talking to people in businesses and working on local projects is incredibly valuable. You know, because if you do that, and even if you go and you work in a business for a bit and you think, wow, I hated that, I do not like doing that stuff. Well, that's really good, because you're not going to waste years of your life trying to pursue a career that once you get into the career, you suddenly think, blimey, well, that was a mistake. I wish I'd done something else. So it's all about kind of breaking that almost glass ceiling to try to understand the reality of the world around you. And for me, that's very much about engaging. And what I would have liked to have seen when I was at school, I don't think it would have been possible back then, but I would like to have seen very much what the team and what Richard and Jay and Enda and everybody are doing here, and connecting people up so that we can have a chat about how things are, ask questions, express opinions, and just generally try and pick up on what things are like so that you can make more informed decisions about what you would like for yourself for your own future.
Did you go to sixth form in university after studying your GCSEs, and how did that help develop your entrepreneurial skills?
So as I say, I was in Seiki doing my GCSEs, and I was very maths focused. They didn't offer further maths in my school then at A level, which was a shame. And so I had to go, well, I wanted to do that. So, you know, there were long chats, big decisions. And in the end, I went to a school over in Southport called KGV, King George V, which I enjoyed, actually. It was really good. It was a lot of travelling, you know, but needs must. So I spent my 2 years there, and I did my, you know, maths, further maths, all the rest of it. Fairly academic focused. And again, so it was very academic focused. It wasn't particularly entrepreneurial. I wouldn't say that there was much that I got involved in the way of extracurricular or supercurricular activities. I think you folks are even busier now, you know, but I found it moving from GCSEs to A levels, there was more to do and it was harder. And so there was quite a lot of focus on, you know, just learning the things we needed to learn and getting through the exams. And it's a real pleasure, actually, to see that now some of the things that have changed are that you do have access to more of these kind of super curricular activities to broaden what you're doing. And there's these things, my daughter was doing an EPQ she was telling me about the other day, where she went off and researched something, and I think it was a consciousness after death and whatever it was. But this is all great, and there wasn't very much of that back in the day. So no, I was more buried in the books back in my A-levels.
What did you do before starting Dynamic Devices? Did you work for anyone else or run any other businesses, and what did you learn?
So I went off to university and I was doing an MEng, which is a Masters of Engineering degree. And the emphasis of that was on, the course was called EIST or IIST, I still never know how to say that, which was the Electrical and Information Sciences Tripos. So we started off doing a general engineering course in the first year or so, and then we took options in the kinds of engineering that would interest us. So you got to go and look at mechanical or electrical or chemical or, you know, whatever it might be. Again, I've always liked the computers, so I went into electrical and information sciences and did some programming, learned about electronic circuits, those kinds of things. Then I didn't really enjoy that very much. I was supposed to be doing a 4-year course. So it was the 3 years to your bachelor's degree and another year to get your master's. And to the end of the 3 years, I thought, you know, I kind of had enough of this, really. I'd like to go and work. I'd like to go and do some work. And in the holidays from university, I used to go and work in various different jobs to try to earn some money to pay some of the bills. So I did a lot of working behind the bar in the local pub. And in the end, a good friend of mine who'd left uni, he started work at a local company called Arcom that designed and manufactured SBCs, which are single board computers. So embedded systems where everything's on a board, and this kind of thing would go into utilities, water, oil and gas pipelines, all those kinds of things. So he had a job and he said, why don't you come along, do an interview, maybe we could get you some summer work, earn a bit of cash. And I thought, well, it seems like a good idea. I went along and I found that I really, really enjoyed what I was doing. I was working in a big room with an engineering team, with all these old people, and it was like a real job, and it was very, very different from anything I'd experienced before. And I look back on that now, and I realize actually I was very, very lucky, because I was surrounded by some really, really good people who cared about helping me to learn and educating me. And the whole business of how you function within a company is very, very different, in my view, from how you function within an academic environment. You know, there's all the soft skills, there's chatting to people, there's the 9 to 5, there's the pressure to get things done for deadlines, there's interactions in lots of different ways. And learning about all of that was quite a big thing for me. And also for me, the enjoyment was that they had me, you know, I couldn't do very much. I didn't really have relevant skills. I loved tapping on my computer, but I knew very little about what this business did. And so they had me sort of learning and writing demos, and I'd do these cool demos of how these computers worked. And the salespeople would take them off to shows, and they had me going over to the States, to San Francisco, to shows. This is all about the turn of the century. You may have heard of the tech bubble bursting, which it very much did. But before it did, there were a lot of people saying that everything was going to be different. The economics of the world had changed. Money was being thrown around willy-nilly. It was happy days. And I really enjoyed doing that work and having something at the end of it and showing that to people, and people saying, oh, look at what you did. That's really good. It's nice, that. And I got a buzz from that. So after having done that during the summer, which would be around probably 96, 97, I thought, I want to carry on doing this. I don't really want to go back and do my master's. I had my bachelor's degree, and I thought, well, so I had a chat with the HR department and I said, what would you say if I just sort of stayed here? Would that be all right? And they said, yeah, that'd be great. Carry on, So they gave me a job and I was earning my money and I was learning how to do what I do today. And I stayed there for about 10 years and sort of climbed up in terms of my role, and I ended up managing a team of people. And back then, Linux and open source, which I'm very keen on, were not big things at all. And I went to my boss and I said, I think this Linux stuff is going to be absolutely huge. I think it's going to be everywhere. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take this and put it on our embedded systems, and we could have this embedded Linux. And he just laughed at me and said, no, that's never going to happen. That's ridiculous. And of course it has. Linux is now everywhere on all the servers, all the embedded boards. So I ended up, he eventually understood what we were talking about, and I ended up running a team of people who did some of the earliest work on embedded Linux down in Cambridge. And for me at least, an interesting thing there was that in business, there is very much a kind of a two-track system where if you're technically good at something, you can be a really good engineer, you can be really good at the tech, but to get promoted and to earn more money, to get a better job, there tends to be a view that you need to move over into management and you need to become a manager of other engineers. And I have a bit of a problem with that, because I don't necessarily think that somebody who is technically very good has the right skills to be very good at being a manager. And again, in business studies courses, we learn that we're not great at how we do management in this country and in the West. So I could see that happening to me. I was a middle manager, I was moving lots of bits of paper around, I was having lots of meetings. These were useful skills. That was a good thing for me to do, and I'm glad I did it. But I could see that I was getting further and further and further away from what I really liked doing, which is tapping away on a computer. And that was one of the big things that propelled me into wanting to get back to the core of what I still do today, which I'd like to think of as being innovative and creating new tech solutions for people that bring value to them and value to society, and hopefully that they might want to pay some money for, which would be good.
What's the best advice that you can give to a student that's looking to start a business at school?
Do it. I would say that the biggest thing is just doing it. It's I think that we all have a fear of the unknown, and it's hard to go and do things when we don't quite know what we're doing, and it's scary. And I'll tell you that it took me ages to make the decision to go and work for myself, and it was absolutely terrifying to do that. Now I must have been about mid-20s when I did that. I wasn't married, I didn't have children, I didn't have a lot of bills that I was on the hook for. So in that sense, I was lucky because I had the freedom to make mistakes. And I would say that with innovation and entrepreneurship and running your own business, you make a lot of mistakes. I would not expect everything to go smoothly and swimmingly well and everything to be perfect. It might be, but in my experience, we make a lot of mistakes, things go wrong, we learn a lot from that, and we keep iterating and trying to do better so that we make fewer mistakes, or at least we don't make the same mistakes the next time around. There's an awful lot of structure and information around do your exams, go to university, get a job. I think that's, you want to know all about that, that's great, that's pretty easy to find out. I don't think that, other than what is happening here within the studio school, which is again why I think it's brilliant, there's not all that much information around for younger people like yourselves on how this stuff works. And there's a lot of background that it's helpful. You don't need to know everything about everything. Again, you'll learn as you go along, but there are things that are involved here. What's marketing? How do you create your product? How do you figure out if anyone's going to buy your product? How do you price stuff up? how much of your time are you able to put into things? What is your feeling on your work-life balance? What other people are around that you could talk to and work with? What are their skills? What are your skills? What skills do you need for a team? Can you do it all by yourself? Do you need other people around you? How would you get together with a group of people to do that? What is most important to you? You know, do you want to make lots and lots of money? Do you want a unicorn? Do you want to scale? Do you want a lifestyle business that will just nicely support you and have a nice house, live your life, maybe not so much pressure? What do you want from the effort that you're putting in here? And then there's all the kind of, you know, the stuff that's just quite hard work, really. Like, okay, you're running a business. Are you going to be a sole trader? Is it going to be a limited liability partnership? Are you going to incorporate and be a limited company? What are the benefits? What are the pros and cons of these? Again, you don't need to have all of that and be an expert, but it's good to have a bit of a view of what the differences are, to try and figure out what direction you want to set off in. And I'm very big on that. I'm very much about let's head off in that direction, see what happens, and keep trying to change direction to get where we want, because you never quite know where you're going to be in a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. So then there's, you've got to pay taxes. Bane of my life, taxes. You've got to pay taxes to the government. How does all that work? What's corporation tax? You know, if you have all this money coming in, if you're really successful, you're selling products or services, great, and you've got money coming in, one of the big things people do wrong in their first year, or a couple of years, is they think they can spend that money. And actually, in the best possible case, about 20% plus of that is going to go in tax, which will be paid in a lump sum at the end of the tax year. And if you don't have that, you're going to get a bit of a shock. And then you've got VAT, value-added tax. You know what that is from buying in the shops. You've got 20% VAT on what you sell as well. Do you become VAT registered or not? So, you know, on and on and on and on. There's all sorts of this stuff. And then you get into managing people. Do you have people working for you? What kind of contract do you have with them? What if things go wrong? How do you deal with that? How do you incentivize them? How do you upskill them? How do you keep them happy and productive? What kind of a business do you want to create? What kind of a culture do you want to be responsible for? Because if you're running the business, you're responsible for it. You make those decisions. You set that culture. So there's lots and lots of things that I think we could be doing and should be doing. On a very specific note, you know, I'm a techie. I like computers. If you like computers, I would be going and working on open source projects. Yeah, I could ramble on about that, but in essence, open source is about creating technology, software, innovative solutions that everybody can use. And you tend to end up working in teams with people all over the world, and that helps you to understand, how do I get on with people? How do I get things done? How do I deal with problems? And there's so much diversity in what people get up to there that you'll probably find something that is up your street. And then as you move along and you get into conversations with people, whether going for a job interview or talking to potential partners or investors, and they say, well, tell me about you then, you know, what do you do? What are you interested in? You've got concrete stories you can tell then. And you can say, well, actually, you know, I worked on this stuff, we did this project, and then these people looked at that, they really liked it, and these were some problems. And that's a great way. You know, if somebody comes to me and can have that conversation with me, I'm really impressed. And that really differentiates them in my mind, and I will remember who they are. So I would be getting out there, doing it, engaging, finding other people to work with, and if you like the software stuff, getting into open source.
What are the plans for dynamic devices in the future, and do you believe that you'll set up any more businesses?
Well, yeah. So, as I said earlier, I think that the honest answers here are that you fail a lot of times. You know, I don't know what the rates are, but the rates for startup businesses failing in the first couple of years are quite high. And you learn from your mistakes, and you have to be kind of expecting of that, I would say, in my opinion. Or maybe I just fail a lot more than everybody else, I don't know. Maybe that's the truth. So I've set up a number of businesses over the years. I mean, my very first business was an abject failure. I set it up with two friends. We knew very little about what we were doing. and that all collapsed in a lot of acrimony. It was very difficult, learning experience. Then I set up Dynamic Devices. We've been going, as I say, for 20 odd years, so we must be doing something or other right to keep managing to continue. And I've set up other businesses since. I have a quick shout out to my Kettle Companion business, kettlecompanion.com, which is, I think, a reasonably innovative little idea where we've created a device which is quite simple. I worry about my mum and dad. They live in their house. I live in mine. They're getting older. Worry that they're okay. So, they don't like Big Brother watching them and cameras and things all over the place. And they don't like tech very much. But, my mum does make a cup of tea in the morning. So myself and a friend of mine had an idea. What about if we put a smart plug in the plug socket in their house, and the kettle's on that? So when my mum puts the kettle on to boil the water for a cup of tea, it sends a signal through the internet. And then in my house, I got a little 3D printed model kettle, and that changes colour when she's boiling the water for a cup of tea, and then it stays green for the rest of the day. So whenever I wander through the kitchen, see it's green, and I thought, oh, she's okay, she's all right, she's up and about, mum's all right. And it's very low impact, very simple, and people love it because it's a simple, reasonably cheap solution, and it just gently keeps them in touch with family, and also people use that for their kids at university. So that's a little example of a small startup business that we created to pursue what we felt was a kind of tech for good, innovative idea that could help people around and about. And as and when I have more time to pursue that, I want to be growing that business and doing more things with it. Then with Dynamic Devices, I got into this because I wanted to continue to be close to doing sort of tech innovation. And to that end, I didn't want to grow that business massively because then I would end up being the person who managed all the other people who were doing the tech innovation, and I wouldn't be doing it. Now, this was 20 years ago. My views have changed a bit since then. But as a result, I've kept Dynamic Devices quite small. And what we have instead, I describe as I've built up an ecosystem of other small businesses that my business works with, which I think works really well, actually. So I work with another business, Geneva Micro. I'm very much a software person. My business partner, he does all the hardware, so he will source components from all over the world. He will do bill of materials for pricing them up. He will design PCB, printed circuit board layouts. He will get prototypes manufactured. He will deal with the factories in the UK and Eastern Europe and China to manufacture boards. We have to get them certified with testing, for example, so they don't go crazy with radio emissions in rooms and break things. And he does all of that. We work very closely together. Customer comes to us, and if they need some of what we do and some of what Michael's business does, maybe we bring in somebody to do enclosure design or CE testing, you name it. And nowadays, security is a very big thing, so we have that too. So I've got this kind of ecosystem of like-minded small businesses, and we all come together and work together. And very much like that, because we get to work with people we enjoy working with. And I've been doing that now, as I say, quite a long time. But in the future, it's quite difficult to brand that because that's quite a fragmented approach. And when you've got a customer, they don't really want to be dealing with multiple different businesses. They want one business with one brand for one solution. And so there's a new business which we've just incorporated and are in the process of bringing up called Active Edge Solutions Limited, Active ESL. And that's a group of us with our own businesses who are combining our forces and perhaps even our talents to continue to create innovative technical solutions in the embedded space, the connected devices space, and get out there with, we're looking at edge AI systems and maybe a bit of quantum computing and all these kinds of things. So I'm quite excited about where that will take us in the future.
If you were a secondary school student again now, what type of businesses would you look to start and why?
Well, I can only give you quite a biased answer, and that answer is only really helpful to somebody a bit like me who is interested in the techie stuff. Now, there will undoubtedly be different answers for different people. And this is not the right answer for everybody, but it's all I know about. So in tech, I would say that the pace of change is just absolutely incredible. You know, it's increasingly impossible to keep on top of how rapidly things are evolving. I mean, I'm getting new AI models from Anthropic and the rest of them on almost a daily basis. And that's only AI, which is a small part of the wider world I operate in. I would probably, when I started in embedded systems, it was a lot of fun because at that time, late 90s, there weren't a lot of kind of rules. We were kind of finding things out as we went along. And one of the people I worked with said it's like being in the Wild West, you know, because you were kind of figuring out how to do, what best process would be, what this looked like. And I really enjoyed that. So again, if you're someone who likes that kind of thing, not everybody does, but if you do like that kind of thing, for me today, I would be going into something that is like that today. Now, after 20 years of this, embedded systems is still something of a black art, but it's much more understood how you do things nowadays, much more process. So again, if you like that, that's a great place to go. If you want to go into something that's more of a growth industry, if you like, kind of, you know, much newer, much more on the cusp of being a big thing, I would say that AI has got to be one of the big things. AI is going to change the world. You know, as I say, when I started, there was no Google, there was no broadband, it was all dial-up networking. When some of you are sitting here in another 20 or 30 years, the people you're talking to will live in a completely different world. And I think that a lot of that will involve them using AI. So I would get on top of that because in my mind, there's a lot of snake oil being said about this, but in my mind, I would say, you know, it's not going away. It's going to be a part of your life, so you might as well be good at it. And then you can leverage that for your benefit when you're going for job interviews and starting businesses and whatever you want to do. So I would get learning about that right now. The other thing, if you're a real kind of computery person, is I believe that quantum is going to be huge. Quantum mechanics and quantum systems and quantum computing have been coming for as long as I can remember. But we're finally now at a tipping point where we've got real quantum computers, you know, real, you know, physical quantum computers that can solve incredibly hard problems that we were never able to solve before. You know, you can run drugs, compounds, and molecules through your quantum computer and your AI as well, and get solutions we just could not achieve before. So the thing with quantum is that it's a completely different way of working with a computer from what I do, which is classical, or, you know, the old people way of doing things. And companies like IBM are really keen to facilitate younger people to learn at a young age how to get into this, because they know that young people today are going to be the engineers of the future, and they need them to have these skills, which are new. Nobody really knows how to do this stuff. I find that quite exciting. So I'd get into that. And then probably the other one, the last one, is if you're more on a sort of, you know, biology, chemistry side of things, I'd probably be looking at biotech. You know, I've always thought biotech's really cool. The stuff that they're doing now with CRISPR gene editing, looking at sequencing out diseases, custom pharmaceutical compounds, you know, it's something you can inject designed for you, for your body to fix you, as opposed to just something that probably works at a level of efficacy on a population is really interesting. And I think that, again, it's all about where are the careers. If you want to be a top footballer, great, go for it. Good luck to you. But you know that it's a pyramid. You know that very few people actually get to that point where they can, you know, have support themselves, even have a lot of money. So if you want to go and have a good standard of living, it's worth thinking now about where are the jobs for the stuff I want to do. You know, do I go in, do I study this, do I go down this route, do I learn about this? Because if there are no jobs to do this stuff, you're going to have a really hard time getting a job. Again, if you want to do what you want to do for the heck of it, for fun, do it, great. But if it's about a job and security and money and those things, it's worth thinking about what is an expanding industry where they need people to do stuff. They do in embedded systems, they will do in quantum, they definitely will do in AI. A lot of people are saying that's not true, but we will need lots of people to drive and wrangle AI, and I would say biotech too.
That's awesome. Thanks ever so much to Raina. That was brilliant. Thanks ever so much to Raina and Lorelei for asking their questions, and for Alex, our entrepreneur, for answering those. I really resonated with what you were saying, especially around the management side. It can be quite frustrating if you're really good at something in particular. You kind of, people assume that you're then also good at managing other people that are interested in that as well. And then the only way for you to progress normally within an organisation is to take on more responsibility in terms of management. And there's no necessarily opportunities for progression or to progress just because you're good at what it is that you do. So you get forced into a situation where you have to take on things in other areas you don't want to do in order to feel like you're continuing to progress.
For sure. I think it's a really big problem. I think it's been around for a very long time. It's kind of ingrained into an understanding of how management works within most businesses. I have friends who work at IBM around the world, and I think IBM is one of the very few companies that doesn't do that. They have an explicit technical excellence track, and if you just want to be very good at doing tech things and have a nice job and earn the money and all the rest of it, you have the ability to do that within IBM, because they recognize that we all have different sets of skills, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and just because you're very good at doing something with an AI or whatever, doesn't mean you'll necessarily be very good at managing a team to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that the sooner that we as a culture of businesses actually understand that, the better everything will be for the businesses, because it's the business that suffers at the end of the day through not making best use of the staff, of the resource that they have.
Yeah, well, hopefully more companies in the future will, especially as technology continues to develop, adopts that approach more and more. So we have a couple of closing editions on the Kids Interview Entrepreneurs podcast. Our first closing edition is to Simon Squibb and ask you, what's your dream?
Wow, all the hard questions today then, my word. Well, my dream for a very long time has been to have a little cabin by a lake in the middle of nowhere, nowadays with a Starlink, and just sit off and mind my own business and be quiet and tap away on a computer and have friends round and just do whatever the heck I like to do. Whether I will ever achieve that, I don't know. In the shorter term, I feel very grateful that I've been able to continue to do what I want to do, which is to run my own business and make that work and work with people I really enjoy working with, and do really, really cool, exciting projects. We do stuff with space, we do stuff with, anti-terror, we do all sorts of interesting things, which gets me out of bed in the morning, and I want to carry on doing more of that. I think also what I'm very keen to do is I'm very engaged with the ideas of what we within the technical community can do to help society. I have an issue with the way that historically society has viewed making products and making money, but other things like the climate and quality of life as externalities, which are not accounted for in the sums that you do for how successful you are. And I would like to continue to do work which is of use to people within society, as well as making some money while doing it.
Yeah, those are really nice dreams, and I'm sure you'll continue to do those and move forward. And And I hopefully, ultimately, you get your dream of that cabin and the Starlink and
We
a
we
bit
can
of
but
peace and
hope.
quiet.
We can but hope. Yeah.
Our second closing edition on the Kids Interview Entrepreneurs podcast is to Stephen Bartlett. So we've got a couple of conversation cards. So if you just want to pick up one of the decks
Okay,
and
just this
at
box?
random,
All right,
select
then.
a card and then give
Wow.
that to Raina or Lorelei to
Okay.
ask you your final question.
Wow, I will go with that one then. Thank you.
What is an inadequacy you admit to that you could work on starting tomorrow? Sorry.
I have to answer these questions, do I? Wow, let me tell you about all of my inadequacies. There are so many, we could be here a long time. I think that certainly within this conversation on entrepreneurship, I am not good at focusing on the business and making money side of things. And I think that's a very common inadequacy, limitation of technical founders. You, in my experience, you often find you've got very technical founders and you've got very sort of non-technical, sociable kinds of founders, sales founders. And neither is better or worse than the other, but you need to understand where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. Partly so you can work on your weaknesses, partly so that if you need to bring in other people to turn those into strengths, you can find those people. So I tend to go and run after the shiny things and do the cool, complicated tech, because I like doing that. And that's not very sensible if you want a successful business. What I should be doing, and I know this, and Michael and I, my business partner, rant about this from time to time, we should be doing something relatively easy that's competitive against what other people are doing in the market, a bit better, the Bill Gates, Microsoft, just good enough approach. And then we should be selling that and selling that and selling that and selling that. And that would bring in a lot of recurring revenue, would make a lot of money. And that's how to be good at business in tech, but it's not what interests me. So I think that probably is what I would acknowledge as my inadequacy.
I think that's a really good acknowledgement. I think a lot of founders struggle with that, like you said, and there's positives and negatives to both sides of that. Thank you ever so much for your time and attention today with another episode of the Kids Interview Entrepreneurs podcast that we shot here today at UTC, the studio in the Baltic Triangle. Thanks again to Mr. Kerry, Sector Skills Champion, for his help and support, not only with the podcast, but with the Enterprise Education in Secondary Schools programme. Thanks to Jay for also producing and directing the podcast. And finally, thanks to Paul Brett for his support of the Brett Centre for Entrepreneurship, as well as Sir Peter Rigby for his support of the Enterprise Education in Secondary Schools programme. And we look forward to seeing you in the future in another episode. Take care for now.